Hello, everyone, and Momo, thank you for being with us today in our first webinar. This is a very significant milestone for us as part of the mission that Vero Norte has to connect our part of the world that has many opportunities, but also many challenges, where we are investing and where we are partnering with companies and funds and technologies that can make this part of the world progress faster and ideally with more sustainability and more well-being for its inhabitants. And being able to connect with you today to transmit to this audience your experience, your insights on how to make technology more feasible, especially coming from the science world that we know has very transformative capabilities. So thank you again to everyone that's here with us, and thank you, Momo, for taking the time and for partnering with us on this adventure.
Pleasure to be here.
Take it away, Pipe.
Great. So first of all, before we start, I would like to acknowledge and thank some of the institutions that made this possible. So I want to thank EAFIT, Universidad de EAFIT, who is our main ally for this initiative. But we also have others that join by inviting all of you guys to be part of this. Deep Tech Colombia, Bancolombia, Universidad CESA, Confama, el CUE, Comité Universidad Empresa Estado, Connect Bogotá, Corporación de Investigaciones Biotecnológicas en Medellín, Digital Hub en Monterrey, México, Universidad Escuela de Ingeniería de Antioquia, nuestros amigos de MacroWise, Ruta N en Medellín, la Universidad Tecnológico de Monterrey en México, la Universidad de los Andes, Universidad de Monterrey, Universidad Javeriana o Pontificia Universidad Javeriana y la UPB, la Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana en Medellín. A todos, muchas gracias y seguiremos invitándolos a este tipo de webinars y a estos espacios. So I'm going to start by introducing Momo, who is a really good friend, and we have known each other for many, many years. So it's a real pleasure for me to welcome him. Momo, we call him Momo, but his name, I don't know if I'm saying in the right way, Momo Vuyisich, but we call him Momo, and I met him almost 10 years ago by this name. So Momo's story is one of those rare journeys where deep scientific research meets the real-world entrepreneurship. He spent years at Los Alamos National Laboratory working on some of the most exciting frontiers of genomics and human health, leading projects on microbiome, infectious disease, and even vaccines development. But what's even more inspiring is what comes next. Momo took that scientific experience and turned it into a mission-driven company. He co-founded Biome Life Science, where today he leads the research efforts and he's the chief scientific officer, preventing and cure chronic disease and slow aging through personalized health solutions. Here at Vero Norte, we're very proud to be investors in Biome in the past, and I personally serve as a board observer, a role that has allowed me to witness firsthand the incredible impact Momo and his company are making. In this conversation, Momo will take us through the journey of spinning out a company from academic research, the challenges of turning science into business, and the lessons he has learned along the way. Momo, thank you very much for being with us, and we are thrilled to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Great, Momo. First, a short introduction about yourself. Could you provide us a concise introduction, about Biome and what you do today? Can you tell us what Biome does? What is Biome's mission?
Yeah, I will. So let me first start by explaining a metaphor. So if you think of a large jet airplane that's carrying 400 people, those planes do not crash very often. And the reason is that we have implemented preventive maintenance for such jets, meaning that before they fly, we assess all of the parts of that plane, we check them, make sure they're functional, and then the jet flies. And that's why they're safe. Until we instituted preventive maintenance programs for these large jets, they used to crash all the time. And so what we're doing at Viome is we're implementing essentially the same principle to the human body. We are basically collecting stool, blood, and saliva samples from our customers. Well, they collect them at home. They ship those samples to our laboratory, and then we identify and quantify about 10,000 different parts of the body, and we quantify how well they function. Do they function properly or not? And those parts that do not function properly, we find ways to tune them so that they function properly. And the tuning is done with food and nothing but food, just anything that you can consume either as actual foods or as supplements. And so the goal of the company is to enable people to digitize their human body and to understand what parts are functioning well, and those that are functioning well, keep supporting them in that healthy function. And those parts of the body that are not functioning well, they would follow specific nutritional recommendations to consume specific foods in order to improve those dysfunctional parts of the body to maintain a very long health span.
Thank you, Momo. Very interesting. So, Momo, just in very simple words, what is the technology behind it? What made this work?
Yeah. So the main two technologies are in the wet lab. So we have a wet lab and a dry lab. So the wet lab is where we actually bring samples in and we generate so-called meta-transcriptomic data. And what that is, it's just a name for an analytical method or a test that identifies and quantifies all RNA molecules in the sample. And RNA molecules are these messengers from our genes that tell the body what to do and how fast to do things. And so that's on the wet lab side. So we for each sample, we basically identify and quantify about 10 million of such molecules. And then on the dry lab side, which we also call bioinformatics, we interpret those sequences. And what for each sample type, the bioinformatic output is the list of all microorganisms that are living in that ecosystem and their relative abundance, and then the quantification of all genes that are expressed by those microorganisms. So which genes are expressed and to what degree? So that's called quantitative gene expression. And then for human genes, the same thing. We quantify the level of expression of all human genes. So those are bioinformatic outputs. And so that's basically the core of digitizing the human body. We are quantifying different biochemical functions. And I think that it's important for people to understand what these biochemical functions are. So when I talk about biochemical functions of the human body, I'm thinking about roughly 100,000 biochemical reactions that make us live and make us who we are. So let's talk about some of those. That has to do with moving the muscles in order to chew food and push food down the digestive tract. Biochemical reactions then digest foods that we consume. They transport nutrients throughout the body. Then you have biochemical reactions in mitochondria in all of our cells that basically produce energy for us to be alive. And then we have functions such as liver function and kidney functions to detoxify our body. We have immunological functions to protect us from pathogens. We have central nervous system functions to power our muscles, to control our muscles, and to give us speech and consciousness. So all of those are 100,000 functions. And what we want to do eventually is measure as many of them as we can. Well, not eventually, but today we're measuring about 10,000 of those functions. And it's very important to assess their level of activity, because if you think of a simple biomarker in human blood, for example, cholesterol, I think most people know that high cholesterol is bad, but it turns out that low cholesterol is also bad. So there's a range of cholesterol values that are actually healthy. Too low is bad, too high is bad. The same thing for blood sugar. People know that high blood sugar is bad, but low blood sugar is even worse because it'll kill you instantly. And so even for blood sugar, there's a very narrow range of healthy concentrations. And this is the case for the vast majority of these biochemical reactions in our body. Most of them need to be performed at a certain level. Too fast or too slow is not healthy.
Great, Momo. Thank you very much. We will come back to Biome, but I want to ask you last questions, and is what is the impact of this? How many people have taken this test? How many data do you have right now?
Yeah, so we currently have about 500,000 customers in more than 100 countries, and we are at the petascale data set. So we have obviously a very large data set about the human biology.
Got it. Thank you, Momo. So, Momo, now would like to switch gears, and we want to go back to the origins of your journey.
Okay.
Could you give us a short summary of where you're coming from, where you was born, how was your life, how you decided to become a scientist, and pursue this career in science?
Yeah, I mean, that can be a very long story. I'll make it very short. I lived in Yugoslavia for 20 years, and then I moved to the United States, and I lived all over the United States. We even lived in Denmark for a year. And I don't really know what made me decide to be a scientist. I just am always fascinated and curious about how things work, and specifically how biological systems work. So I've always been super interested in how does every part of my body function, and what makes us alive, and what makes us healthy, and what makes us sick. So that's basically the motivation.
Great. Thank you, Momo. Momo, and then after studying, you're doing your master's and then your PhD. How come you ended up working in Los Alamos National Laboratory? Could you tell us that story?
Yeah, I mean, in science, it's sort of you bounce around, you know. In college, I didn't choose where I went to college because that's where I moved in the United States. But then after college, I really enjoy the outdoors. And so we visited Utah, and I fell in love with Utah. And so I chose to do my PhD in Utah, not because specifically of the university, but because the environment was so great to live in, right? And then after my PhD, I wanted to live abroad. And so I applied for a bunch of postdocs outside the United States, and I accepted the one in Denmark. And then after that postdoc, I needed a job, and I applied for a bunch of jobs, and I got the one in Los Alamos National Lab. So it's not like you necessarily always choose exactly where you go, but as a scientist, you have the opportunity to sort of live anywhere you want. And I really love the Southwest of the United States. We lived there for 15 years, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And so we really enjoyed that area. And Los Alamos National Laboratory is very famous for so many reasons, and it was a great place to develop the technology and not be pressured all the time to publish papers and not be pressured to teach. So I didn't have to teach, so I could focus on proposals and on projects, and I didn't necessarily have as much of a pressure to publish as an academic would be at a university. So I just found that particular environment right for my goals and for my objectives. But if you have a PhD, you can pretty much work anywhere in the world and do many different kinds of things.
Got it, Momo. Momo, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you hear Los Alamos National Laboratory, you think on national security. Is that the only purpose of that lab, only researching in national defense, or there are many other things? And were you involved in national defense research and
Yeah.
projects?
Yeah, so the core mission of the lab is national security, but when you're a scientist there in biological sciences, you basically have 100% freedom to do whatever you want. So you can pursue. So I pursued gut microbiome, which has nothing to do with national security, right? And so my main projects were supported by national security programs because I wanted to develop a global biosurveillance method. So this test that we're using today at Viome, it was actually developed originally at Los Alamos National Lab as a global biosurveillance test where you can basically take any sample from any human anywhere in the world and find out exactly what pathogen does that person have, where did it come from, is it mutated, is it natural, is it zoonotic, is it engineered, and how do you treat it? What is it resistant to in terms of drugs? What is it susceptible in terms of drugs? So that was sort of one of my main projects. But I had many programs at Los Alamos National Lab as a scientist that had nothing to do with national security. It's a very flexible place. As long as you can get funding, the lab doesn't really care what you do.
I got it. Understand. Before continuing and switching gears, I just want to do some recommendations here for the audience. Right now, we have more than 130 people in the platform. So I'm going to say for the last time in Spanish. Abajo en los iconos pueden encontrar un icono con un mundo, como un icono del mundo o un icono con tres punticos. Si tienen el icono del mundo, hacen clic ahí y ahí pueden escoger el idioma en el que quieren oír, porque estamos haciendo traducción simultánea al español. Lo seleccionan, pueden apagar o no el sonido original. Les recomiendo apagarlo para que lo oigan todo en español y poner listo o OK para activarlo. En algunos computadores como los Mac, por ejemplo, o en los celulares, no está el iconito del mundo directamente, sino que uno va al icono que es un círculo con tres punticos, hace clic, ahí aparece el iconito del mundo con la opción de hacer la traducción y se sigue el mismo proceso. Sorry, Momo, I was just telling the audience how they can activate the translation services. So, Momo, now I want to go in that period of time when you decided to become an entrepreneur, to leave your career as a scientist doing only research and becoming more a businessman in the sense of bringing your technology to the world and commercializing it. First of all, you tell us that is specific technology that allow us to keep samples in a form that we can use it even when they're very delicate, like the RNA. That was the milestone where all this thing was created. But there are many other things that you have developed in Los Alamos, but also in Bayonne. So tell us, what was that process? How did you make the decision of becoming an entrepreneur and start a new company out of this research?
Yeah, so I didn't actually start the decision by saying I want to become an entrepreneur. My decision was, I am 35 and I want to do something that when I retire, I will be very proud of, and I will feel like I impacted the world in a positive way. I improved humanity. That's sort of the first thing. I want to do something meaningful, something useful, something that will help people. Because as an academic, I looked around and asked the question, how are we actually helping people live better lives? And I struggled to find those answers. And so in 2010, I decided that I basically wanted to understand, how is it that there are people who are 95 years old and they are very healthy, cognitively, mentally, physically, and immunologically. They're herding their sheep, they're making cheese, they're gardening, they socialize with friends, they live a full life at the age of 95, right? And there are many people like that. So nature has already figured out a way to keep humans healthy for a very long time. Unfortunately, in developed countries, that is becoming very rare. In other words, here in the United States, most people have illness by the time they're 50 or 60 years old. They have some kind of a chronic illness, and their quality of life becomes poor. And as we know, here in the United States and most other countries, average life expectancy is about 80. So half the people die by that age, but they become sick 10 to 15 years earlier. So what is it about these people that live such a long, healthy lifespan? They don't take any medications. They don't go to the doctor. They don't take antibiotics. They don't eat any synthetic chemicals. And so that's really sort of, how can we understand exactly what enables those people to live long, and how can we enable or empower every individual on Earth to live such a life if they choose to do so? So that was the main question. And so in order to understand how a system functions, you have to measure all of its parts. And today, when you look at the human body, you can see that the majority of science had focused on DNA, studying DNA or our genes. And that's because we still have that old-fashioned thinking that we are only human and that our DNA determines our health. And we now know that that's not true. We are actually mostly, not mostly, but we're sort of equal parts human and microbial. So when I talked about those 100,000 functions earlier, about 50,000 of those functions are performed by our gut microbiome, oral microbiome, vaginal microbiome, and so on. Half the functions are human, half the functions are microbial. And so if you just look at the human genetics, it contributes to diseases and cancers to a very small degree. So you have to study gene functions and you have to include human microbiome. And so it took me 6 years to get the grants and to develop this technology. And yes, one of the parts was to be able to collect samples anywhere in the world and ship them at ambient temperature to a laboratory. But it was also how to process those samples and how to derive the useful information about the human body. So to answer your question, when I started this journey in 2010, I did not at that time define what was going to be the organization that was going to translate this knowledge into something useful. It could be a nonprofit institution, it could be a foundation, it could be a for-profit company, all kinds of things. But 6 years later, the technology was ready, and I wanted to translate it into humanity. And at that time, I realized that a for-profit company was the best vehicle because of so many advantages of for-profit. First of all, you don't have to get grants every year. You don't have to depend on money every single year. You can actually charge people money and get money, and that way you can be self-sustainable. And so that's very important. And second, as a business, you can offer products, you can make money, and so on. So you can scale much more rapidly and much more efficiently. And so I met Naveen Jain, who is our CEO, and we decided to start Viome back in 2016.
Got it, Momo. Thank you very much. Momo, what were your concerns, hesitations, fears of making that transition? You know, getting out of the lab and start getting into a company, hiring people, being responsible for the top line, but also the bottom line of a balance sheet, etc.
Yeah, I had no concerns. I had just excitement. My journey over the previous 6 years before we started Viome was to understand how to run a successful company. I read every single day. I mean, every single day for 6 years, I read about how were successful businesses run, how they were structured, how their hiring went, how their organization went, what mistakes companies had made that were important in their journey, and what mistakes companies had made to kill the companies. So I just immersed myself into that understanding for 6 years. So when we started Viome, I had no any kind of negative feelings. I went into it by saying, let's start this. Let's give it the best we can. Let's make as few mistakes as we can and run as fast and hard and smart as we can. And whatever happens, happens. Because even if it fails eventually, I will have learned a lot and I will do better the next time, right? But now, almost 9 years later, not only have we not failed, but there's basically no way we're going to fail because of how we organized the company, how we structured it, who we hired. We have top talent in the company, which is key. And we now have lots of customers and lots of revenue and so on. So now, 9 years later, there's not even that sort of thought, oh, is this going to fail? But I think setting realistic expectations, I'm going into a startup. Statistically speaking, 95% of startups die in the first 3 to 5 years. So statistically speaking, you can just set your expectations. This will likely die, but let's do our best, see what happens, learn as much as we can. And if it does fail, it'll be a good sort of foundation for the next project.
I got it, Momo. Momo, this is my last question, and then Camilo is going to talk about a different topic that is going to dive deeper into that process of licensing technology. And is, what are the skills? What are the the experiences that you as a scientist took over these experiences as an entrepreneur and help you to be a better entrepreneur? Is there any specific things that you can recognize?
Unfortunately, no. As a scientist, you're basically trained to write grants and then discover something and then publish a paper on it and then write grants and just cycle through that, right? So through that scientific journey, they don't teach you how to hire good people. They don't teach you how to organize anything. And so I had to sort of, well, as I said, I learned a lot about this. And so even as a scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, I essentially ran a startup in that environment. I created my own team. We had our own team name, our own email address. I chose who I was going to hire, and I developed a very robust hiring process that I still use today. That, I think hiring is one of the key important pieces of any successful team, the hiring process. And so I practiced essentially that as a scientist. And I think you can do the same thing. So there's no reason why every academic scientist cannot run their lab as a small company. That's a very nice thing. The only problem with that is that, of course, you have to publish papers, so you cannot really put out products and you cannot behave as a company. But you can run the organization efficiently, and so there are many layers to that. But I guess the main takeaway is all of this knowledge is available today for free for anyone to access, right? And so go out and learn. There are many blogs, there are many YouTube videos. Go and learn, learn, learn. But one other takeaway that I want to mention is to me, the biggest reason for success as an entrepreneur is that whenever you want to solve a problem, your mindset is, what do I need to do? What solutions do I need to come up with? Whereas academics are mostly stuck on, what are the problems with this? So they'll say, okay, we want to do something. And many academics and unsuccessful entrepreneurs will say, well, we can't do that because of this, this, and that. Successful people say, we can solve that problem. And these are the ways that we can try to solve that problem. So always think positively and always think in terms of solutions, not problems. Don't say, I'm limited by this. Don't say, well, we can't do this because of that. Don't think like that. Just think all of that is just wasting your time. Think about, okay, we want to solve some problem. How do we do that? And find ways to do it. It's a very simple concept.
Thank you, Momo. Amazing. So Camilo, go ahead.
Momo, just as a segue into something I want to talk to you about, like the formal process of licensing the technology and so forth. You just said something that I think is very profound, that I'm not an academic, but I sort of have this feeling that stop being like a formal academic scientist and going to the market is like selling your soul to the devil. Like you lost somehow like the purity of creating knowledge and expanding knowledge for the financial benefit. And you reframed it. I don't think there's a specific question here, but you reframed it as, no, if you have a solution to a big problem, maybe the correct vehicle is to make it a business because it gathers the correct incentives and somehow foolproofs your solution and will test it the correct way for this to be actually meaningful. Was that your message? Did I get it correctly?
Absolutely. Exactly. And let's not even waste any time on thinking of any of these old-fashioned stigmas about what scientists do in academia and what scientists do in industry. All of that is just old stuff. Let's move forward and think about what legal vehicles, what technologies, what people, what structure can you use to solve one of the world's biggest problems? That's really what it's about. And if a for-profit company is the best vehicle, don't even think about it. Just do it. It's that simple.
That is amazing. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the licensing process. And I would love to start with understanding if there is, in your mind, a competitive advantage of bringing the technology from the academic and exclusive research environment into the market compared to, you know, innovations and research that is done exclusively in, the commercial field. What how should we understand the differences of knowledge and technology that is being created, let's say, at a university? Um, is it different? How should we frame that?
Yeah, I think it's a spectrum, right? So I think that having intellectual property and having some kind of a technology that's proprietary it can be helpful in certain areas, but I would say don't even worry about it. If you think about Amazon, Amazon has no IP, right? It's just pure execution. Tesla doesn't have IP. It's pure execution, right? And so all I want people to think about is successful companies rely on execution, and that is efficiency, and that is doing things cheaper, better, faster than everyone else. And that's really the most important thing. It's the execution. Ideas are unlimited. Technologies today are not only unlimited, but the space is so complex with IP that there are very few places where there are specific technologies that will block you or prevent you from doing what you want to do. So I would not really worry about that at all. If you can license something that gives you some kind of an advantage, some investors will see that as a positive, and you may benefit from being able to get a little more investment. And that's basically it. That's the advantage. But investors are now realizing as well that it's really the team and the execution that are going to make or break your company, and not what technology you have, right? Now, for us, the advantage was not that we hold that patent or exclusive license to that patent. The advantage to us has always been that we are using the right technology to quantify the human body. That is the advantage. All other companies are using DNA, and DNA has very little relevance to human chronic diseases and cancers. So if you're measuring something that doesn't have relevance to your health and illness, then you're not gonna find anything out, and you're not gonna impact humanity. And so that's our advantage, is choosing the right things. So that's one of the main takeaways: is use the best tools to solve the problem. Always focus on that problem. What is it that you're trying to solve? And what are the best tools and best mechanisms to solve that problem? And don't worry about whether that's heavily protected by IP or there are 1,000 companies using that same technology. Don't worry about that. Just go and solve the problem.
I understand completely. But you just mentioned there is a licensing relationship. There is a formal agreement between Viome and Los Alamos where the original research was performed. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have an exclusive license to this technology from my team at Los Alamos. Yes.
Right. Could you walk us through that how that agreement came to be? What is, how was this proposed to Los Alamos? Is it a typical conversation that goes on at a
Yeah.
research center? Is there a pro forma agreement, or is this very ad hoc that has to be built case by case? How does that process work?
I mean, yeah. So Los Alamos National Lab has a technology transfer office, and there are people who are professionals who make it very flexible to do this. And so, yeah, I mean, Naveen came and was interested in licensing this technology, and I wanted to spin out the company. And so we simply talked to the technology transfer office, and we decided on the terms and signed a contract, and that was it. And most universities in the United States also have a technology transfer office. So I think that this is not a big deal or a barrier or anything like that.
But it does seem from our context, in LATAM, where at least we see that universities are a very fruitful place for proposing new technologies. There are meaningful things being created, but then we look at the market and we don't see scientists becoming entrepreneurs. And there is apparently a roadblock somewhere. I won't say that roadblock is 100%, by no means, but it's not as fluid or as typical as you've just stated. Maybe could you just give us your understanding on why does this actually work at a place like Los Alamos that must not be the only one where this works fluidly in the US?
No, I mean, in the US, this works very well. I mean, Stanford is like the world leading organization for spinning out companies and entrepreneurs, right? So they have a very active technology transfer office. And, University of Utah, where I went for my PhD, they started this process back in 2000. They actually created an entire research park that's adjacent to the university, where spinouts from the University of Utah would actually be located, so that university professors who want to have a spin out, they can have a building next door so that they don't have to travel somewhere else. They can just walk over from place to place and share. So this model has been active for 20 to 30 years in the United States. And so I would say that if you're not seeing it in Latam, I would identify what are the problems to that and solve them. And so I think that maybe legal mechanisms for spinning out technology from universities might need to be solved. So solve that. I think a bigger problem likely is that university positions are very, very prestigious and very nice in terms of you have a salary, you have a lab, you have sort of steady job. Whereas if you go start a startup and it fails, you may not be able to come back. And so now you're thinking, who's going to pay my mortgage and who's going to bring food to the table, right? And so I think that that's more of a fundamental problem. So I think that enabling an incubator next to a university where a university professor can sort of reduce their activities as an academic and then commit some time to the startup for 1, 2, 3, 4 years until it's clear that that startup is successful or not. And then the university and then the professor can simply choose at some point in time, okay, I want to go back to become a professor because either the startup died or because I can find other people to run it and I can just be an advisor. Or they can choose to say, I'm going to leave the incubator now. This company is going to be successful. I'm comfortable with this position. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to leave the incubator. I'm going to leave the university and just move my company and become successful. So I think enabling that transition so that it's not a big jump. For me, I was confident enough that even though Los Alamos National Lab had an entrepreneurship program that allowed me to return within 3 years, I didn't choose that option. I simply left with no ties and no possibility of return because I knew that the rest of my life I wanted to dedicate to something that is going to impact humanity in a positive way. And whether that's Viome or other companies, it doesn't matter. But not everyone can make that big of a jump.
I understand that, and I would go even as far as to extrapolate that mindset framework that you provided earlier around my conviction around my solution incorporates not only the technology, but the execution and my wanting to actually bring all this together to the university institution or the research center institution. That the mindset is not only the academic surrounding, but also because universities tend not to be for-profits; they're non-for-profit organizations. And again, I don't want to say that that is selling your soul to the devil, but it's incorporating the for-profit piece institutionally, so they are motivated to incorporate the mechanisms to complement technology research in a means like the incubator that you just mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, well, UC San Diego has an incubator on campus, and if you want to spin out a company, they will provide you with space, equipment, utilities, everything basically you need to start it, and they will take an equity in your company, right? And so for 3 years, you can basically live rent-free. You don't have to invest a lot of money in big equipment. You just need to find enough money to hire some people and buy the reagents and start the work. So I think that that's a very good enabler. And Illumina does that. Stanford, of course, does that. I mean, many universities do that. So I think that there are many mechanisms, but I think the key is for the administration to create a mechanism where university professors have a much lower activation energy for transitioning from academia to industry. I think that's really the key, that transition.
Thank you. I think Felipe has a question.
Momo, very interesting, and I want to build on what Camilo is saying, and I want to bring it to a personal level. When you talk to some of these researchers here in the region, there is a lot of things happening in their mind when it becomes about incentives and financial security. When you're a professor and you're on a tenure, you have your life solved in that sense.
Yep.
Or you getting the grants, you know how to get the grants. So they become a little bit afraid of going and start a company where there is a lot of risk and especially financial risk.
Yep.
How can you design the right incentives to do that, but keep also that if you don't embrace risk and try to do something that could be difficult or could fail, you're not pushing hard enough to do something that could be really successful? How those incentives in a personal level could be designed, and in your specific case, how do you assess that transition from a very secure job to a very, very, I will say, risky endeavor?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I thought about this was, I said, okay, one day I want to jump ship and become an entrepreneur. And that's going to be highly risky for the family. So we needed to set up our lives such that my wife can support us financially in case my company falls, right? And so while my friends bought houses that were twice the size of ours, we bought a smaller house so that we have a smaller payment. While our friends bought new cars every 3 years, we drove older cars. And while our friends went out and spent money on going out to dinner and so on, we saved money so that we have enough savings for a couple of years, right? And so that took about 10 years to sort of prepare myself for the time when, okay, now I can stop my salary and go to become an entrepreneur, and then, so not stop my salary, but stop my sure salary, my sure financial security, just go become an entrepreneur. If that fails, it's okay, because I'm smart enough, I'm hardworking enough, I have enough credibility that I'll find a job within some number of months, and during that time we're okay financially. So we basically prepared for that. So I think that's a key. So two pieces are key here. One is prepare yourself for a gap in a job for 6 to 12 months, let's say, or worst case scenario, a year and a half or two. So prepare yourself for that. And second, have the confidence that if your company fails, you will be able to pick yourself up and reestablish yourself one way or another. That's really the key. Now, in a situation where the society basically has very little industry, and most people are just in academia, getting back to academia may be challenging. I don't know, but it may be challenging. And if there isn't a lot of industry, that system may create the notion by the people that if their company fails, they really don't know where they're going to go. They may say, I don't know if I can get back to my university. I don't know if they'll take me back. And if my company fails, there aren't a lot of companies that are doing what I know how to do. And so I may not get an industry job. And so that's really the uncertainty that people face. So here in the United States, of course, we have lots of industry. And so you don't have to worry about finding a job. But maybe in some less developed countries, that's not the case. So I think that that entire ecosystem is important. But I think if that is the case, then I would say the universities should enable this transition by guaranteeing re-entry of the university in case your company fails within some number of years. And I think that number of years is 3. In other words, you have 3 years to either succeed or fail your company. And after 3 years, you make a decision. Are you going to go with the company 100% or come back to the university? I think that would make people, academics, a lot more willing to jump ship and try entrepreneurship.
Amazing, Momo. Very interesting. Momo, I want to go to this specific first couple of years when you're starting the company. How is it? What type of people you need to surround it with in order to lower the risk and being successful in this
Yeah.
first couple of years, so you can, like for example in Biome, that is now a grown-up company, you can see that the company is moving forward with much less risk than it was at the beginning. But being a scientist, what are the resources you need? What is the team? What is the people you need to surround you when you also have limited resources?
Yeah.
What would be your recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, people are by far the most important asset for any company. By far, there's nothing in that category of anything else in terms of your location, your business idea, your mission, your investors, your technology. All of that is secondary. The people are going to either make your company or break your company. So, in terms of the people, the way we have structured our company since day one is that we only two layers, not seven, not nine, two layers of management. We have the leadership team and we have everyone else. And that's it. We currently have about 90 employees. We don't have a single manager in our company. Not a single manager. Everyone is completely self-motivated, self-driven, and focused and knowledgeable and experienced. If someone needs to be managed by a person, oh, how are you feeling today? Do you need me to make you coffee to get your day started? Are you tired? Did you have a party late last night and now you're having a bad day? If you need that, you can't be in Vio. Like, that's not like, go somewhere else, right? You have to come in on time, be sharp, understand why you're there, what the company's mission is, and what can you do today to move that mission forward, every single employee. And so you basically don't want to set up a system where people need to be managed. That's super important. And so we have two layers, and the leadership team, by the way, none of us, not a single person in the leadership team is like a manager. We don't manage people. We just enable them to succeed, but we actually do work. Like, all of us do actual work every single day. We're like employees. We do work. I don't spend my day going through my employees and saying, "Are you doing okay? What's going on?" No, it's if they need my help, they'll come and I'll informally go and visit them and talk to them. And if I can help them in any way, I will do that, of course. But everyone works. Everyone works. That's really key. And so you want to hire people who are self-motivated, who understand the mission, and you want to teach them what is their mission and what is their purpose of being there. The purpose of an employee is not to spend 8 hours doing something and getting paid for it. That's not the purpose. That's like maybe in government or some institutions. That's not why you're here. You're here to move us towards our goal. And what is our goal? Our goal is to enable people to live healthy lives. What can you do today to move that goal forward? That's your mission. So it gets really complicated, but that's sort of the bottom line. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely, Momo. Makes a lot of sense. I have here a question from the audience that I think is very relevant for this specific part of the conversation. And when you are a researcher, you're working in different projects. How to choose which one is the one you need to bet? Or should you bet in a couple of them, two or three of them, and see which one could become a company or a startup? Or do you think that you need to focus energy in one and put all behind it?
Okay, completely. I would say in my mind, that's not a good approach. None of that is a good approach. So in 2010, I was working on many projects, and in 2010, I defined, okay, the next 10 to 30 years of my life, I'm going to be solving this problem. Okay. It turns out that none of the projects that I had been working on were going to support that goal. None. And so I went to my management and I said, I'm going to reset my scientific career. I'm going to give $3 million of funding that I have for my current projects. I'm going to give them to my postdocs and my co-PIs, and I'm going to completely leave those projects, and I'm going to restart my scientific career, and I am going to start working on projects that eventually will support my goal, my mission. What is the problem that I'm trying to solve? So I think you should flip things around. Instead of asking, I'm working on 4 projects, which one should I spend more time on? Don't think of it that way. Think of it 10 years from now. What problem do you want to solve? and then work backwards and identify the best way to solve that problem. Best way meaning the most efficient way to robustly solve that problem. And then if one of your projects or multiple of your projects currently would support that, then prioritize those projects. If none of your projects support the problem you want to solve, then get rid of them all and start new ones. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, make a lot of sense. Momo, my last question before Camilo jump in is about what did you learn on these early days starting Biome? What were the things that the decisions you made that you say, thanks God I made this decision early on because this absolutely changed the trajectory of this company and put it in the right way? And which one were the mistakes that you would like to not do if you can remake history?
Yeah, so there aren't any really decisions. We have made thousands of decisions over the last 9 years, right? So there isn't any one that's sort of the most impactful. There are many other companies that are what we call binary. Like they have one drug and they're going to put 100% of their money into that one drug. And if that drug works, they're going to become very successful. If that drug doesn't work, the company is dead, right? And so those companies may have, let's say, 3 drug candidates, and they have to make the decision as to which one of those 3 to pursue. And for them, that's like a pivotal decision for the company. We did not have to make such a decision because we are not a binary company. We have many different ways of success. And so we don't have to make any decisions that are crucial for our existence. But I do want to answer the second part of your question, and that is what mistakes did we make? So to me, one of the biggest mistakes is to hire people who look good on paper and interview well, but they can't actually do anything. And so you have people with a PhD from Stanford who are actually useless. They cannot do anything that you expect them to do. And so I would say minimize the respect for any sort of a pedigree, where they went to school, where they worked, what kind of a position they held. All of that completely falls away. They either can do what you need them to do or they cannot. And that is not determined by their pedigree and their history. It's determined by their mindset, by their resourcefulness, by their creativity, by their motivation, all of those things that are intangible. You cannot learn that in school. You cannot bring that from another job. And so that to me is I think one of the biggest traps that people fall into. They hire some high official at a company and they have a huge pedigree. And then it turns out this person is there for themselves, not for the company. And now what they do and what they say is going to be to support themselves, not to push the mission forward of the company. And that's where the trouble starts. And so it's crucial to choose people who are there for the company and not for themselves. Now, that's not easy to figure out, because there are people who are very smart, they interview very well, they will say the right things, and it'll take you maybe several months to realize that they are not really who they say they are. And so the moment you realize that this person, the way they speak, the way they do things, it's clear that they're there for themselves and not for the company, you need to make an immediate decision to let them go. Because the longer you keep them, the worse things are going to get.
Very valuable, Momo. Thank you. Momo, my last question, and sorry for taking a little bit longer here, is I have been witnessing the transformation of Biome because I think I have been part of the board as an observer for almost 6 or 7 years now. We started with our first solution, then always this obsession on how we can create more impact to people, but how can we scale this process as well? But on the other hand, we are always riding a wave that is in the front of technology. The understanding of the microbiome and the interaction with the human body is a subject of current study. So in some cases, there are not papers that say that what we are doing is what should be done because this hasn't been discovered. We are in the process of this that we can bring to the market. So I just want for you to elaborate a little bit more on how you balance the business part of it, because you continue to do a lot of research inside Biome, and actually is like another company inside Biome that you have collaboration and platforms to collaborate with a university and researchers all over the world. How do you combine and how you balance the business part with a science that is developing itself and is discovering new things, and you need to allow them the space to fail, to trial, to test, and come back with new knowledge?
Yeah, I mean that's the finesse of balancing a business, and businesses who spend all of their time on products without the science backing, they likely fail. Businesses who pay attention to science but don't have products, don't have revenues, they likely fail. So it's really a balance, and it's a continuously shifting balance. So I've been the director of clinical research at Viome for the last 8 years, and I'll tell you that the first few years, we very much focused on discovering how the human body works. So, for example, one of our biggest projects that we carried out in the United States and Japan was to understand how can we tell every person on the planet what foods they should eat and what foods they should not eat based on how high their blood sugar will spike. So we spent a lot of time on that, and that is sort of one of the core logical circuits in our platform. Then later, we did a bunch of clinical studies on different diseases: depression, anxiety, IBS, and type 2 diabetes, because those are the four diseases in the United States that are very prevalent, and they have either no treatment or they have complex treatments that many of the times don't work, or they spend a lot of money. And so we chose as a strategic priority to study those four diseases. So depression, anxiety, IBS, and type 2 diabetes. So we spent several years really studying what are the molecular mechanisms that lead to those diseases and how can we reverse them. And then we did another shift in our clinical research where, okay, we think now we understand what the root causes of those diseases are, and we think we can modulate those root causes with nutrition. Let's run randomized placebo-controlled trials to test whether our nutrition works. So we switched our clinical research program, not switched, but refocused it on running randomized controlled trials. And that's what we have focused on over the last 3 years, running 4 randomized controlled trials, while still maintaining, we have an active program in Australia and New Zealand, several active programs here in the United States, in terms of other things like other diseases, but our focus has shifted on this. And so maybe next year we're going to shift focus towards aging and longevity, and we're going to run a randomized controlled trials on anti-aging. We don't know, but it's always science first, product next. Science first, product next, right? And so what science can you do to support your products and make them better and more efficacious?
Thank you, Momo. Thanks a lot. Amazing.
Yeah, Momo, I want to go back briefly to the answer you were providing, Felipe, regarding people. And I don't want to make this trivial by no means, but there are concerns. I've heard concerns from the academic world, from the research world, that I'm a scientist, I'm not a businessman. I know my science, but I don't know how to run a company. And it seems to me like the university is sort of a special place because you have challenge from many different fields, not only science, but also economy and accounting and a whole bunch of stuff. Do you have like a top 5 first recruits that you as a scientist should bear in mind when you make the decision, I'm going to put together a company, it's either a spin out of the university, we're going to license. These are the folks that I need to accelerate or to be mindful of execution from day one.
That'll depend very much on what the company is doing. I'll tell you what we did, right? So what we wanted to do was to bring a product on the market where we needed a collection kit for stool that can be shipped anywhere. We needed a laboratory that can analyze the stool samples. We needed bioinformatics that can analyze the data. And we needed the logic to translate those data into nutritional recommendations. And then we needed the front end, meaning either a web interface or an app to convey that information to the customer. And so knowing what is your MVP, so the minimum viable product, what is your go-to-market strategy? I would define that. So the day that we started the company, I knew exactly what our go-to-market strategy was, which is one of the main reasons that Naveen wanted to invest in this company and wanted to start this whole thing, because I had a very mature idea as to what we're going to do. And in 5 months to the day, from the day we started Viome, we had revenue. 5 months. So in 5 months, we established the laboratory, we established the bioinformatics, we established the logic, the nutritional logic, and the front end, meaning the app and the web interface. And we started selling in 5 months. That's because we had a very defined plan as to what to do, and we knew exactly which people we needed to hire. I knew who to hire in the lab. I knew who to hire for bioinformatics, and then Naveen knew who to hire on the finance and the back end and the front end on the software side. And bam, it just happened quickly because we knew exactly what needed to be done. So that's going to depend on every company. What is their product? A company that's trying to make a supersonic jet like Boom Supersonic here in the United States, that's going to be super different. A logistics company is going to be super different. So it really depends. But I would say the people are going to make the difference whether your company is going to be successful or not. Because no matter what your idea is, no matter how mature it is, no matter what the technology is, no matter whether you have patents or not, people can make anything successful. Anything. I mean, look at Amazon. I mean, all you have to think about is Amazon and Tesla. Look at how successful they are. They have no patents on anything. I mean, Amazon just moves packages from one place to another, and Tesla uses electric motors that were available for 100 years, right? But they executed so incredibly well, and that's really the key.
So I think the abstraction is you have to know exactly what your value proposition is, what the critical route is for you to be able to deliver on that proposal, and then
Yes.
Your first key hires are those that liberate the restriction at those key junctures. If I just do an
That's it.
abstraction of what you just said.
I mean, exactly. That's it. So I would say the moment you start the company, you need to have a business plan that leads you to the go-to market. It can't be, we're going to do 3 years of research and see what we find. That's not a company. That's nothing. You have nothing, right? What is your go-to market strategy? Have you done your market research? What is the product? What does it look like? What is the value prop for that product? What is the cost? Is there value? Are people going to pay for it? And so these are the kinds of things that you need to have. And then, yes, exactly. Hire only people that are going to get you to market. Don't hire other people. You don't need to have an accounting team for a company with 10 employees. You don't need to have that. You can outsource that for just a fee, right? To a consultant. You don't need to have a clinical advisory board with 10 docs for your MVP product. You literally just hire as few people as you can. And, we ran our lab, and I helped set up our lab. Like, I was the chief science officer and co-founder. I put together benches for the lab. I took the trash out of the lab at the end of the day. It's like everyone does whatever it takes to get stuff done. You don't need to hire 300 people right away so that every task is covered. Whoever has the time does whatever it takes. And if you don't know how to do it, you learn it. All the knowledge is free and available to everyone today. There is nobody with any degree or any age can say, well, I don't know how to do that. Well, go learn it. Knowledge is free and widely available everywhere. So you can't just have an excuse for not doing something. Just go get it done.
I love that mindset, Momo. Thank you. I just want to remind everyone that you can post your questions on the chat, and we'll try to relay as most of them as we can to Momo. Momo, my last question for you, or maybe to hear your thoughts on, I sort of sense there's this chicken and egg dilemma within our community and our context, because the definition of a developing economy is that we don't have as much capital, our industries are much smaller, our markets are smaller, the perception of risk is higher. Let's say that research-wise, all things being equal, it seems like hesitancy to build a company should be higher. So to break that dilemma, uh, researchers and institutions should have some awareness of, what are the critical things that we do need to put in place so our spinouts, our incubated companies have at least a chance. Have
Right.
the normal level of potential success. What would you recommend broadly that our institutions, the ones that are hearing us, be mindful of as they set up and progress in their spin-off and their tech transfer initiatives, so there is a higher chance for them to succeed?
So here's one idea that I have for an emerging market like Colombia. By the way, I love Colombia. I love Colombian people. I love everything about Colombia. It's such a wonderful, wonderful country in so many ways. Um, so um, here's how I would approach the solution potentially. I would work with the government to to institute a program where a percentage of all grants that are given to universities goes into a entrepreneurial fund. And every year, professors apply for that fund. And if they get it, then they will basically get free startup funds, and there will be an incubator on university campus. But with those funds, they can hire a certain number of people, right? And for a certain amount of time, to get to the market. So I would say that an absolute requirement is to have a go-to-market strategy, and you basically come up with a business plan and a budget that says, in 2 years, we're going to have revenue. We're going to be selling this for this price. It's going to provide this value, and the university can then give them that money. And to me, that would really, in a robust nationwide way, spin up a bunch of companies systematically. To me, that's the best way to do it, very robustly. It solves many, many problems. And then once someone goes to market, I think that at that point in time, the university has no more need to help that person. Now they've proven that they can go to market. Now, institutional investors can take over and invest now more to scale it, to make it more efficient, to diversify the products and so on. So to me, that would be the way I would approach that problem. Go big or go home, basically. Any other way that you approach this problem, you're going to be solving some parts of it to some degree. And even if you're successful, you're going to have a very limited impact. So yeah.
Amazing. That sort of makes me think about the Israeli tech incubators, where the government, the mechanism is not exactly the same, I believe, but the government sort of leverages the value of equity at the beginning, so risk is much slower, much lower, and the company can progress faster through those first periods of time. So there's either early confirmation that this is going to work or this is not going to work. And most of that risk is borne by a government fund.
Yeah.
I appreciate all those comments, Momo. We're going to take a few questions from the audience that have been posted on in the chat, and I'd like to begin with one that is actually the last one that is posted here. Is do you interact with research professors that are thinking about spinning out a company or bringing their technology to the market? What do you say to them? What are your most powerful lines of motivation to get them to make the decision?
Well, first of all, I have approached only a few professors with, hey, your paper is amazing, your discovery is amazing. This could make a great company. Let me know if I can help you with that process. And then we have a conversation. The vast majority of conversations are initiated by professors. They come to me and say, "Hey, Momo, I know you went from academia to startup. Do you mind helping me, just figure out what I need to do and what the process is like and so on?" And what I tell them is exactly what I've told you guys: is have your go-to-market strategy, understand the market, and then hire the best people that you can. That's basically what makes or breaks companies. So it's honestly, it's one of those things where once you've done it and once you have this knowledge, it's fairly simple. Like if I needed to start a new company tomorrow, it would just be pure excitement. There would be no negative feelings or worry or anything like that. It's just pure excitement because it's actually fairly simple and straightforward. It's not conceptually. Execution is not simple and straightforward. We have all kinds of challenges all the time. I'm not saying running a company is very simple, but conceptually starting a company and knowing what to do, what not to do, this knowledge is all, again, free and widely available on the internet. So go learn it. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know if you have any more specific questions, but it's basically have your go-to-market strategy. Investors want to see revenue. They don't want to see promises and 3 years later you're still doing research and you still have a promise, right? People don't want to see that. They want to see revenue. So how do you get to revenue? And revenue confirms that you have a product that people are willing to pay for. And to me, that's really a super important thing. I'll just give a brief example. There are tens of thousands of photographers who aspire to have a website and sell photographs and live off that and just travel the world, take photos and sell them, right? There are tens of thousands of people like that. But what people don't realize is just because you show photographs to your friends and family and they say, oh my God, that's amazing. You're the best photographer ever. And you ask them, would you buy my photographs? And they're like, of course I would. So now you start a photography business, you quit everything, you travel the world, you have a photography website, and now you go back to the same people and say, hey, you want to buy this photograph? It's $400. And they're like, well, I don't have space on my wall. I need to talk to my wife, things like that. It's like, okay, you're not providing the value. You don't have a business, right? People are not swiping their credit card for your product. Therefore, you don't have a business. And so maybe that wasn't the best example, but the point is have your go-to-market strategy, hire the right people who are going to make that happen and start running. And make sure that that go-to-market strategy is not a 10-year plan. It should be no more than 2 years, I would say. No more than 2 years. And ideally, within 1 year, you should have a revenue. In today's world where so many things are commoditized, there should be no reason why you need more than a year to go to market and have revenue, unless you're making some kind of a specialty product for like space exploration or something super expensive and challenging. But for Colombia, for example, I would focus on something that has to do with like food products. For example, I love food, and food in Colombia is like amazing. So if you do something with foods, I mean, you can make it in the next month. You don't need to wait for anything. High tech, well, there's all kinds.
Thank you.
Thank you, Momo. There is here another question, and regarding the balance between the speed you need to go to the market, but the quality you used to get when doing academic research. How you can provide the best quality possible and going faster to market with products when you are used to do research that takes a lot of time and a lot of testing and a lot of quality control.
That is the most important question today, Felipe. The most important question. So one of the main reasons that so many companies fail is that they are waiting to release the product until it's perfect. Okay? And that is what kills them. So if you release a product and 10 years later you say, holy moly, that was the most amazing revolutionary product, you failed. In fact, you don't hear about those companies because they failed, right? If you look back 10 years on your first product and you say, wow, that was a crappy product, that was horrible, okay? That's why you succeeded. Because going back to my photography metaphor, if people are paying for your product, they're going to give you very honest feedback about what sucks about that product. And you're going to go and fix it immediately. So the day we released our product, we were immediately emailing customers and asking them to share their experience with everything. And 6 months later, we had a very different experience based on the customers. Before customer feedback, you can get feedback from friends, family, colleagues, all you want. It's not very relevant because they didn't pay for it. And so I would say one of the most important things and why I highlight this go-to-market strategy, get to market as soon as you can. The worst thing that'll happen is you will launch a product and people won't buy it. That's the worst thing that'll happen, right? So what? You'll learn something from that. But waiting 3 years and running out of money to make a product that you think is perfect, that's what drives companies into bankruptcy. I hope that's clear.
Very clear, Momo. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just think of this. If you gave someone today iPhone 1, what do you think they would think about iPhone 1? They wouldn't think highly of it. They would say, wow, this is horrible. It's slow, it's small, there are no apps. What can I do with this? I can't do anything with it, right? But back then, it was good enough for the market. And so you just release your iPhone 1 and you'll release your iPhone 16 later on. Don't wait until you have iPhone 16 to release it.
But this is very challenging, Momo, when it comes from a mind of a scientist or a researcher, because normally you take a lot of time of polishing and polishing your research, getting all the data, understanding all the arguments that you need in order to be able to be published. So it's a little bit of going in a different way of thinking that is challenging. And I think is one of the invitations you are doing this is change the mindset, because it's not the same skills and the same things that you need to do in this world in order to be successful in the other part.
Absolutely, Felipe. Exactly. You have to change your mindset. The purpose of academics is to publish papers and discover basic, scientific principles. The purpose of a company is to make people's lives better by offering products that offer a good value to the customers. So those are very different concepts. And so you have to change your mindset. And in order to get to a better product, you have to offer a worse product in order to learn how to make it better from people who paid for it, and to get revenue so that you have money to release the next product. Because you can only rely on investors for so long and for so much money. But really, the bottom line is the most honest feedback you will receive from people who paid for your product. And that's one of the most important reasons to go to market early.
Got it. Thank you, Momo. Camilo, you have some other questions from the audience?
I think I have one that is very meaningful. Besides a whole bunch of questions around Viome and the product and the sales channels, which I think would be, we can send over to you, or you can direct us, Momo, what are the best ways to answer those. But the one that some have asked about is to go back to what you were telling us about your decision in 2010. When you were having multiple products, multiple research projects, and you decided to go into one, and you explain your framework. The specific question is how to make a decision. How do I decide what is the line of research that I should focus on if I'm thinking about that this should become a company sometime in the future? Could you maybe expand on your thinking back then, and what would your recommendation be?
I mean, so the context of 2010 is that I am super, super curious and I read a lot, like far more than a normal person, right? And so I read enough that at that moment in time, I was very confident that I could solve this problem of understanding the human body and implement sort of a preventive health strategies like we do for jet airliners, right? And so that I think that confidence is an absolute key ingredient. If you say, I want to solve this problem, but I have no idea how I'm going to do it, and I don't know if it's going to work, and if you don't have this sort of really high confidence, then I'm not sure you should pursue it, because you will run into barriers immediately. So for example, in 2010, when I went to my management and I said, I want to reset my scientific career, every single manager said, this is a scientific suicide. No one has done this. You cannot just give up all your projects and all your expertise and all your grants, move into something new, and expect that you're going to get grants and you're going to be able to start that. That doesn't happen. The reason professors get grants for some research is because they have had expertise in that area. You can't just be a newcomer and get money in a very competitive area. And so every single manager said, don't do it. This is crazy. And if you don't have that super strong confidence that this will absolutely happen, you're going to say, well, all smart people around me tell me don't do it. Well, then I'm not going to do it, right? So you have to have that confidence. And that confidence comes from knowledge. It doesn't come from speculation. It comes from knowledge. So if you want to solve a problem, you have to become an expert. Luckily for you, all world's knowledge is free today. You have access to as much knowledge as any billionaire in the world for free. And so go and learn it and figure out how you're going to solve a problem. And once you figure it out and you have that confidence, you will overcome all barriers. I hope that answers it.
I think it does, Momo. It goes back to mindset, and that mindset built upon
The confidence, the knowledge.
expertise. Yeah. Pipe,
Okay,
do you
Momo,
have more questions?
Yes, I have just a last question because it's very frequent here in the chat and when people approach to us with this specific challenge. And I think it has to do with what Momo was explaining us about testing the market, going really quick to the market and see what's going on, so you can show that you are bringing value. But we have a challenge in this region, Momo, of financing. So what will you do, or what would be your advice for these researchers that are having trouble in getting finance for their projects, or where they want to become entrepreneurs, but there is a lot of difficulties here in this region to get finance? What is the best way to show that this is a backable business by different financing sources?
Yeah, I mean, that's a super hard question. If there is no financing, there is no financing. I mean, what do you mean what's the best way? There is no way if there's no financing. So I would say in limited financing situation, limit the scope of what that product is. And so you cannot say that you're going to build a spaceship in Colombia, right? You're not gonna go anywhere, right? So you have to think about, okay, what are the things that I can do with the current financing system? So I would say limit yourself to that, because that's a serious limitation, right? You can have this grand idea, but if there's no financing, then it doesn't matter. So I would say first ask yourself, okay, I want to stay in Colombia. What are the limitations, and then you research and you connect with the right network and you say, okay, I can get X amount of money as seed money to test some ideas and go to market. So what can I do with that? And so, for example, I love food, and anything that has to do with food, I just love it. And so I could say, you know what? There's a big need today for high quality protein supplements. Why don't I just, in my own garage or my own apartment or my own bedroom, why don't I formulate some supplements, protein supplements, and start selling those to the local markets? And that's a very low hanging fruit. There's very little money to be invested. And if that starts to be successful, then you can basically go to investors, sort of like on a Shark Tank show, right? Watch every single episode of Shark Tank. Don't miss one episode of Shark Tank and Bear's Den. I watched every single one of those episodes. That's where you learn what is important. And so go watch those and then have an idea, implement it in a small scale, and then go ask investors to scale it, if that's what the market will bear. If you say, you know what, I want to do something in high technology and buy $1 million worth of equipment in order to start. If there is no $1 million, then what, you can't do it. You just can't do it. Like our sequencer costs $1.4 million. If no investor will pay $1.4 million, then what can you do? Well, maybe someone else has the sequencer and you can say, you know what, can I just use it for 1 day per week and I'll pay you this much money? And that way your costs are lower. So try to figure out ways to use other people's equipment, like on a Saturday or a Sunday when they're not using it, or in the evenings or evenings, and see. So, I mean, there's too many scenarios, but this entrepreneurial mindset is not, oh, well, there's no financing, therefore there's nothing here. Think about, okay, what financing is available and what ideas can I actually implement, and start with those. And once you make enough money and become successful from that one, maybe you'll become the investor to invest in a greater idea and then go from there. So got to start somewhere.
Yeah, Momo, I agree. People sometimes think that they need to finance the whole project. from A to Z, and breaking down the project or the lifespan of the company, or what you intend to do, is the best way to do it. But you have to be able to set up a milestone, but also a way to show that milestones create value, and you can bring either revenue or depending on the stage of the company, and then just finance this little part. This is a controlled risk. You are showing value. Maybe you are giving a little bit more of equity on that beginning, at the beginning, for this investor that took more risk. But this is the way to do it, little by little, but always not just getting into the milestone, but showing the value you are generating. Because if you are generating value, what we think is that finance will come. Yep. Money will always chase good projects. Absolutely. And good businesses.
Absolutely. Exactly. I mean, you just have to realize that the investors are looking for a great business. And so if you have one, they'll come to you. That's not a problem. That's what happened to us. So, yeah.
Okay, Momo, I think this is more than enough. You have been very generous with your time. We really enjoyed this conversation. We got a lot of messages from many people telling us that this is very valuable for them. This is going to be recorded. It's going to be available for everyone. I want to thank all the people behind that made this possible. The university, FIT, who was our main ally, and the other institutions that joined us. I want to thank also my partner, Camilo. And let's continue talking about this great subject. We're going to invite you to the next webinar that is going to be in a month from now. Thank you very much, Momo. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Momo, thank you, man.